On the night of February 27, 2014, unknown armed people took control of the Crimean parliamentary building. They hung out the flag of the Russian Federation. In the morning of the same day, people with weapons occupied the village of Chonhar in the Kherson Oblast. After a while, armored personnel carriers were riding across farm fields and people in military uniforms without identification marks were planting mines at the approaches to the bridge leading to Crimea. You are watching the program about the ATO, the objective of which is to get to the bottom of such events as the annexation of Crimea and the subsequent anti-terrorist operation, or ATO, in the east of Ukraine. History is written by the winners, and usually they ditch the achievements of defeated opponents, extolling their own virtues. The ATO has been ongoing for more than 3 years, and hopefully the end of this senseless war is still out there on the horizon, though uncertain. This documentary series will cover the recent events in Ukraine and, most importantly, will try to explain the reasons behind these or other events. Throughout the Soviet era, Sevastopol, a one-of-a-kind base, was the home port of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. But in 1991, Crimea slipped out of Moscow's control together with Ukraine. Russia, however, as the inheritor state of the USSR, could not abandon the Russian Black Sea Fleet as leverage against the US Navy in the Mediterranean Sea. The fleet division process lasted right up until 1997. According to the initial plan, the fleet of the Russian Federation was to be redeployed to the Novorossiysk base, but the construction of this base had to be completed and it had to be expanded. Up until that time, the Crimean bases would have to be leased out. However, the first border conflict occurred as early as 2003. It was kind of a dummy rehearsal of an invasion. The Russian leadership at the time ordered the construction of a dam stretching from the Taman Peninsula to the Bordnin Tuzla Island. The builders operated on a 3-shift basis, and the earthwork grew 150 meters a day. After the dam reached the border pontoon near the island, the Ukrainian Marines landed on Tuzla. On the shore, the position of rocket artillery was organized, a powerful line of ammunition was set up, and a minor war for the Tuzla Island, which is approximately 3 square kilometers in area, was literally on the horizon. In 2007, there was a second rehearsal. The Marines of the Russian Federation landed on the Kerch Peninsula without any consent of Ukraine. The battalion of the Marine Corps made its way from the base in Tembruk and made a landing at Cape Opak. The Ukrainian command reacted promptly, deploying paratroopers of the 79th and 25th Brigades, which had strong support of the Ukrainian Air Force. The paratroopers occupied the key heights, thus blocking the movement of the Russian forces and forcing them to return to the base. In other words, it is important to bear in mind that the confrontation in Crimea is an age-old story. Pro-Russian propaganda was constantly disseminated among the local Crimean residents. Political spin doctors were fanning the flames in pursuit of additional votes in the elections. They made constant attempts to highlight Russian-speaking people. And while throughout Ukraine people were stirred up by canvassing in the Ukrainian language, in Crimea pro-Russian political forces were feverishly putting up billboards in the Russian language. A special operation on the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula began on February 20, 2014. Later, the Russian Federation issued a medal for the return of Crimea. Already on February 23 in Sevastopol, a mass rally of thousands of people was held, during which a decision was made that taxes to the official administration in Kiev would not be paid, and Russian citizen Oleg Chali was elected the mayor of the Ukrainian city of Sevastopol. On February 25, a similar rally was held in Simferopol. But let us pause here for a minute and consider one critically important nuance. On the night of February 26, 2014, Russia put skin in the game. Men wearing Russian military uniforms without insignias and mounting Russian military hardware without serial numbers suddenly appeared on the entire territory of the Crimean Peninsula. They took control of the Simferopol airport, the Belbek military airfield, and then the Kerch ferry crossing. That is, from the very start of the operation, the Crimean Peninsula turned into an island, to which Russian military personnel without insignias, the so-called Little Green Men, had direct access. To understand the origins of the polite people, we have to look back in time once again. In 2009, the Russian Federation started to establish the SOF, short for Special Operation Forces. The Special Operation Forces are highly trained troops designated to achieve political and economic objectives at any geographical point around the world that represent the interests in the name of the Russian Federation. The Russian media sarcastically call these people troops fighting a war in times of peace. Roughly speaking, while creating internal problems, the SOF distract citizens from external problems, destabilizing the situation, stirring up public opinion and discord, provoking unrest or even rebellion, eliminating disagreeable persons under the veil of common robbery or kidnapping them under the masquerade of terrorists. All these are the deliberately planned functions of the SOF. Moreover, some missions can be accomplished through third parties simply by handing weapons over the gangsters or mobs of people dissatisfied with the state's policy. Such people can be found in any country in the world, and under the tutelage of a highly trained leader and with external funding, these individuals can represent a very powerful force to be reckoned with. The creation and training of a guerrilla movement is also within the competence of the Special Operations Forces. The Russian SOF started working beforehand. The communication lines were broken, and the majority of Ukrainian military commanders in Crimea were either bribed or turned into Russian moles. In short, they opened their gates without a fight. Those who did not surrender were put in isolation and did not receive any orders from the top brass. Without an official declaration of a war, the Ukrainian armed forces became prisoners of the situation. Hamstrung by the laws of peacetime, the Ukrainian military soldiers did not have the right to use weapons against an aggressive pro-Russian throng of rabid and emotionally pumped-up demonstrators. As early as November 2013, the accumulation of fuel and other resources began at Russian military bases in Crimea. For example, the amount of aviation kerosene alone that was delivered in cisterns was 3 times more than usual, 45 cisterns instead of 12. Given this fact alone, it is not surprising that the Russian Federation's army was able to promptly block or take control of all the military towns and Ukrainian bases in Crimea within just a few days. But why was there treachery? What exactly prompted many Ukrainian soldiers to betray their homeland? It's quite simple. Through the efforts of the pro-Russian leadership of the country, the army has been destroyed systematically and at length. A Ukrainian military service person was paid several times less than their Russian counterparts who were living together with them. It just so happened that the salary of a Ukrainian military service person was slightly more than $150. Funding from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine was at a very low level, and military personnel faced constant problems with fuel supply and spare parts. On March 1, President of the Russian Federation Vladimir Putin asked the Federation Council for permission to apply the military forces of Russian troops on the territory of Ukraine and was given the green light for his green man. This was more of a diplomatic step and an act of intimidation, since Russian special forces were already de facto stationed and operating in Crimea. Military towns whose commanders did not want to defect to the Russian Federation were taken by assault. Ukrainian military were not always sitting on their heels. For example, on March 3, several planes and helicopters of the 10th Marine Aviation Brigade took off from the Novofedorivka airfield, which came as quiet and unexpected for the Russian forces. Thanks to the fog, they flew in the direction of Mykolaiv at an extremely low altitude. They flew very low so that the Russians could not detect and intercept them, and they also maintained strict radio silence. On March 4, Russian President Putin made an interesting statement at a press conference, the essence of which will be revealed in the near future. Listen to me attentively. I want you to correctly understand me. If we make such a decision, it will only be for the defense of Ukrainian citizens. Let anyone from the military service personnel even dare to try and shoot at their own people, whom we will stand behind, and not in front, but from behind. All over the place, the Russians use their so-called People's Local Defense Strategy. It entailed restless and riled-up youth, either unarmed or armed with billy clubs, behaving aggressively and trying to provoke Ukrainian military into using their weapons against them. This would have led the Russians off the leash. As it turned out later, often these were military servicemen dressed in civilian clothing, or simply provocateurs prepared specially to steer gapers. In some cases, this ended up in fisticuffs on the streets. On March 5, a man arrived at the location of the 36th Coast Guard Brigade, who introduced himself as an officer of the Russian Black Sea Naval Fleet. Subsequently, the paratroopers established that he was the commander of the 31st Separate Assault Brigade from the city of Ulyanovsk. During the meeting, he stated in the form of an ultimatum that all units, including the Reconnaissance Airborne Company of the 25th Brigade, which had been training since February 14, must turn in all of its firearms to weapon storage warehouses and put their military equipment in storage depots. At the command of a Russian general of the air cavalry, intelligence service scouts answered with a harsh no and threatened to use weapons in case of an unsanctioned breach and infiltration of the territory. A few hours later, a Ukrainian military unit wearing unknown and unrecognizable insignias on their uniforms was surrounded by unidentified military soldiers who organized machine gun and sniper nests. Immediately after the takeover of the government building of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, local deputies, while in the company of armed people, decided to hold on May 25 a national referendum in Crimea on the independence of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Already on March 6, the date and the wording were changed. The referendum was postponed until March 16, and the accession of Crimea to the Russian Federation was already on the agenda. Even before the referendum, on March 7, the Speaker of the Federation Council of Russia, Matvienko, announced Russia's readiness to accept Crimea. In short, the annexation of Crimea was already a done deal. On March 9, the Ukrainian military put up their checkpoint on the Jonhar Peninsula from the direction of the Kherson Oblast. The Russians, while holding part of the peninsula, moved away from the village of Jonhar. Noteworthy is that the occupation of part of the Kherson Oblast was conducted more out of necessity, as from the direction of Crimea there was basically nowhere to settle and there was no electricity or amenities. On March 11, the Verkhovna Rada of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea adopted the Declaration of Independence. The idea of this document was that Crimea should become an independent state and in this form join the Russian Federation. All this time, throughout the entire peninsula, the seizure of military units and towns continued. At the mouth of the Donuslav Bay, the Russian Black Sea Fleet scuttled several ships, thus blocking the Ukrainian ships that were anchored from sailing out of the bay. Attempts of the minesweeper Cherkasy to break into the open sea were prevented in a severe way by the ships of the Russian Black Sea Fleet.
Значить, я наказ на відкриття вогню віддавав.
I gave the order to open fire. Therefore, we still resisted when everyone stopped. My ship was the last one. When all the ships and ground units were captured, the Marines and Special Forces, when everything was seized, the ships maneuvered in the lake under the Ukrainian flag. Why did this happen? Because I gave instructions to fire off warning shots. It was a deterrent fire, not fire for the effect. This was enough for the special units of the Russian Federation to abandon its further actions. This gave us the opportunity to resist longer. Yes, we opened fire. We threw grenades and we fired small arms. We gave a warning shot along the course. Then we fired off several more warning shots ahead of our course. I take personal responsibility for it, because I did not want to leave that place in disgrace. Due to a combination of luck, the flagship of the Ukrainian Black Sea Fleet, the frigate Hetman Sagaidachny, was at sea, despite the statements of the Russian mass media that the Ukrainian sailors had defected to the Russian Federation. The crew remained true to its oath to the Constitution of Ukraine and returned to Odessa. Not surprisingly, most of the population simply did not understand what was happening. Ukraine was just beginning to recover after the events on the Maidan. Due to the flight of the president and many officials, the branches of power were formed again, many state secrets were stolen and documents were lost. The savings in the national treasury amounted to 108,133 hryvnias and 65 kopecks, which at the exchange rate as of February 27, 2014 was about $10,000. According to various estimates, the former president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, pocketed from $20 to $100 billion from the Ukrainian treasury. The process of returning this money continues to this day. On March 16, 2014, a referendum was nominally held on the accession of Crimea to the Russian Federation. After this day, Russian decorations appeared on the green map. As for February 27, now it's the Russian Special Operation Forces Day. On August 11th, leader of the terrorist group Alexander Zakharchenko announced the counterattack of the so-called Donetsk militia. Not answering the question where the manpower and military hardware came from, he did not mention the readiness of rank-and-file Russian troops to invade the territory of Ukraine. And already after 2 days, the units of the 18th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade of the Russian Army started the battle against Ukrainian troops. Then the situation became seriously escalated. From August 13th to August 18th, in the battles with terrorists and Russian troops, 95 Ukrainian officers were killed. Absolutely not concerned about the safety of the local civilian population, the militants actively fired multiple rocket launchers at the villages from the roads along them. In the area of Luhansk, the situation was relatively successful. Units of ATO forces even entered the city, having taken siege of 2 districts. On August 18th, the villages of Mala Ivanivka, Andrianopol, and Chernukhine were liberated. There were battles for Nizhna Krinka and Stanitsa Luhanska. At the same time, the situation in Donetsk region was much more dramatic. The 1st Battalion of the 30th Brigade, which successfully operated in the area of Musinsk, turned out to be in isolation without supply. The Mount Savur-Mohyla, from which the Ukrainian artillery fire was retargeted at the troops coming from Russia, turned from an observation post into a forward position. The collapse of the defense, especially in the absence of shortage of reserves of food rations and ammunition, happens on the domino principle. Even a dominating position will not be able to hold on for a long time without backup and supplies. The enemy attacked Savur-Mohyla, the defense of which was led by Colonel Hordichuk. A garrison of 10 soldiers managed to repel attacks for a few days. On August 18th, reinforcement broke through to the height, which made it possible to rotate the soldiers and take away the wounded. What is remarkable is that, realizing the importance and danger of the task, only volunteers set off for Savur-Mohyla. Some of them weren't even registered as members of the armed forces, as they arrived in the ATO zone just the day before. Unfortunately, there were no other reserves. Each person was on the account, and Colonel Gordichuk, with the commander of a group of Crimean volunteers, Yuldashev, refused to rotate and also remained in position. On the same day, near the village of Novokaterinivka, the Ukrainian military forces came under fire from the Urahan rocket launcher for the first time. Reconnaissance operations of targets and the adjustment of artillery fire were carried out with the use of the military unmanned area vehicles Orlan-10. Russia supplied the militants with full complexes of state-of-the-art armaments, and the version about the alleged origin of these weapons systems among the militants is basically untenable. On the same day, August 18th, terrorists fired on a convoy of civilians leaving the city of Luhansk. As a result of these bombarding, 17 civilians were killed and 6 were hospitalized. On August 18th, in Donetsk region, Donbass and Dnipro volunteer units, in cooperation with the Consolidated Company of the 51st Brigade and the armored vehicles of the 17th Brigade, came to the western part of Ilovaisk and entrenched on its outskirts. A week before this, the forces of the 40th Battalion of the Territorial Defense occupied roadblocks on the approaches to the city, which created favorable conditions for the assault. The next day, August 19th, the situation escalated. The terrorists did not hide the fact that they were firing multiple rocket launchers. Indeed, they openly admitted this in the mass media. At the same time, the volunteer units Azov, Donbass, and Dnipro 1 entered Ilovaisk, where combat on the streets of the city flared up. The city itself, being a large transportation hub, was divided into two parts by a railway station. This was the third attempt at an assault. Despite the resistance of the militants, they managed to seize and occupy the western district of the city and gain a foothold in the railway depot. The reinforcements from Russia broke through Luhansk. A column of Russian military hardware and soldiers made its way into the besieged city from the side of Nikolaevka. These actions helped strengthen the collapsing defense of the militants and tipped the balance of power of the military forces in the region. At around 4 o'clock in the morning, on August 20th, the Russian artillery dealt a massive blow to the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in Herohivka. Then a swift assault from Roskishne followed. 2 units of the 234th Parachute Regiment of the 76th Airborne A Division from Pskov and the motorized rifle unit of the Russian 15th Motorized Rifle Brigade were involved in the operation. As a result of the attack, 2 Ukrainian roadblocks were destroyed. The strategic height of the Sarmat, which was defended by the fighters of the 24th Brigade and the Storm Volunteer Unit, was surrounded. In response to this, all of the available artillery units opened fire on the Russian troops. A couple of Mi-24P attack helicopters also flew in to support the troops. As a result of the counterattack of the Ukrainian army, the Russians retreated, losing hardware, and more than 25 soldiers were killed. According to intelligence data, the losses of the Russian paratroopers were even higher, since one of the units completely lost their combat capability and was withdrawn back to Russian territory. Fighting for independence, on August 20th, 6 Ukrainian soldiers and 2 pilots died in a battle for the peak of the Sarmat. At the same time, in the city of Ilovaisk, in Donetsk region, the battles for the city continued. Moreover, the Russian media reported about the arrival in the city of the battalions of the Vostok and Oplot militias, but militants taken into captivity turned out to be Russian paratroopers. At the same time, in the area of Savur-Mahila, another tragic event unfolded when the soldiers of the 51st Brigade finally managed to withdraw from the Petrovsky village. The unit headed by Hordichuk stayed its ground, practically in the rear of the advancing enemy. Then the Ukrainian artillery was for the most part suppressed or forced to retreat, and its strikes were becoming less effective. On August 20th, the Russian troops launched another assault on Savur-Mahila. Despite the shelling, on this day the positions were maintained. On August 21st, in Luhansk region, there were defensive battles in the area of Preshchivata and Novosvitlivka. The armed forces of Ukraine liberated Stanitsa Luhanska. During the day, 17 Ukrainian soldiers were killed. The next day, the so-called humanitarian convoy crossed the border of Ukraine. 145 vehicles transporting food, fuel, and ammunition crossed the border at the Izvarina checkpoint. The security service of Ukraine called this act a direct invasion on the part of the Russian Federation into the territory of Ukraine. But it was more of a formal statement, because Russian troops had already been present in the areas of Luhansk, Donetsk, Novozovsk, and Ilovaisk, where the Russian artillery had already shelled Ukrainian territory. On the border, in full readiness, there were 8 battalions of tactical regiments with heavy artillery. August 21st to 22nd, units of the 93rd Brigade attempted to recapture the village of Petrovsky near the Savur-Mahila Mound. However, having lost 2 armored combat vehicles, the unit forced to retreat. The group of Colonel Hordichuk continued to fight while surrounded on the hill. After several months of the summer campaign, soldiers who were mobilized on the wave of patriotic uplifting were simply exhausted. Furthermore, the morale of the soldiers of many units of the military was in sharp decline, and at the same time, Russian propaganda added insult to injury through the regular daily news. On August 22nd, near Kuteynikove village, the positions of the 5th Battalion of Territorial Defense were shelled. The soldiers in the garrison of the checkpoint left their positions as they were demoralized by moving from the border of other units and reports of enemy tanks near Savur Mahila. On August 23rd, the press service of the headquarters of the armed forces of the so-called DPR reported about the formation of an additional 3 infantry units and a change in tactics of warfare, despite the fact that this army has long been formed. Soldiers were waiting for some time at the border, and upon command, Russian troops launched a massive offensive. Artillery units of the Russian armed forces, up to 6 divisions, fired on the positions of the Ukrainian army from its territory. After the departure of Ukrainian troops from Izvarine and Dolzhansky, the focus of the fire impact shifted to the second echelon of Ukrainian defense. As a result, unable to withstand the attacks, the whole 5th Battalion left its position and left the ATO zone. Despite an order to take new positions, most of the soldiers refused to continue their service, and the unit simply left the ATO zone in order to return to their permanent bases where there was safety. In connection with the retreat of the neighbors, the 19th Mykolaiv Regiment of the National Guard defeated the enemy by organizing an ambush near the village of Lysyche, but then moved to the Komsomolsk area. The unit's tactical group of the 28th Brigade retreated from Ambrosiivka, and most of the soldiers later pulled out of the ATO zone. Only 18 of them stayed behind. A lot of harm was done by both the Russian propaganda and Ukrainian journalists who wanted to find some fresh news. The latter, in pursuit of fame, did not bother to check the information of Russian propaganda and informed about the death of Ukrainian soldiers. Some officers also succumbed to panic. Due to this, the Ukrainian front collapsed on the domino principle. By the evening of August 23rd, in the area of Ambrosiivka, the first line of defense ceased to exist. Without facing any resistance, 8 tactical units of the Russian armed forces, totaling about 4,000 soldiers, entered the territory of Ukraine. An offensive was launched in the direction of Torez, Severodonetsk, and Mariupol. It was then that the way to Ilovaisk, where the battles continued in the city, was opened. The 2nd Territorial Defense Unit left the position, which covered up the approaches to the city of Ilovaisk from the side of Donetsk. The remnants of the 28th Tactical Unit went to Starobesheva. The units of the 51st Brigade, which served at checkpoints to the south of Donetsk, also abandoned their positions and retreated to the Berezova area. The information pressure of the Russian media and the hysteria injected into the internet played their destructive role. This is the principle in tactic: frighten, divide, and conquer. Not understanding the general state of affairs on the fronts and not having communication and coordination with other military units and high command staff, some units simply abandoned their positions. In some cases, they even threw away heavy military hardware. The task of any propaganda is to form the necessary public opinion. When it comes to war, the issue is about average civilians' trust in the leadership and about the fighting spirit of the soldiers. A person who does not believe in victory will never fight. Convincing Ukrainians to doubt in the success of their struggle and creating some psychological panic among them was exactly the task of Russian propagandists. August 24th is the Independence Day of Ukraine. On this day, a military parade was held every year in Kiev. The fact that mainly the cadets of military schools and the troops of the Kiev garrison participated in the parade did not have the credibility on the backdrop of total enemy disinformation. First and foremost, Ukraine needed this parade to prevent panic among the civilian population so that they would have faith in a strong army and believe in the promising future of their country. A weakened country will not once end up in a difficult situation, both in the diplomatic and military sense. But if citizens of the country learn about such an ugly truth about the current situation, then this will lead to nothing other than lineups in stores and disorder on the streets. Russian troops took their positions on the border with Chernihiv region in order to return the so-called order and the puppet government to Kiev. the Russian Federation needed only two things: any appropriate motive and a few hours along the Chernihiv highway. In Donetsk, there was another parade held. Militants convoyed Ukrainian prisoners along Artoma, the main street of the city. Some of these soldiers were bandaged. Supporters of the DPR threw eggs and water bottles at the prisoners in an attempt to strike them and show their hatred towards them. At the same time, situation in the ATO zone changed every hour. Ukrainian troops retreating from the border opened up the way to Ilovaisk for the enemy. In the city, the volunteer units and the armed forces units fought bravely. Despite the overall pandemonium, Ukraine continued to resist the attacks of the enemy forces. All available Ukrainian artillery and aviation worked full speed ahead against the Russian forces. In the area of the Shevchenko village, two Mi-24 helicopters struck Russian paratroopers. In the area of Hrashchevate and Novosvitlivka, missiles delivered a combined blow to a command post and technical hardware of one of the Russian tactical groups. On August 24th, in the afternoon, information was received on the change in positions of enemy hardware near Ilovaisk. The identified targets were fired upon, and the 331st Unit of Russian Airborne Forces was defeated. Soldiers of Ukraine's 51st Brigade captured 100 Russian soldiers. All of the detained soldiers did not deny that there were members of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. The front was broken, and the reasons for this were the insufficient training of the mobilized Ukrainian army, the lack of experience of the commanding personnel, and the lack of moral and psychological support of the country's military personnel. August 24, 2014, the army of the Russian Federation entered the territory of Ukraine. Russian paratroopers of the 333rd Unit, 8th and 19th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigades, the 31st and 56th Separate Assault Battalions started to block the movement of Ukrainian troops in Ilovaisk. So the Russian Federation treacherously and irrationally invaded the territory of Ukraine.
And actually, I wanted to point out here with Forte 10 what's going on, and you can see some weird patterns here. So let me get that stream or that page up here for you. So look, see, it's the curved search pattern. Now, we've seen this practice, haven't we? We've watched the U.S. hone this skill over the United States with this curved search pattern here. See that? Interesting how the new Forte 10 displays these characteristics. Because remember, we lost the old Forte 10. It disappeared and never came back. The hex code and everything has never been seen again. So this is the new one. And again, some strange search patterns here to get its feces consolidated. And it's taken a good look around. That's what all of this other weird stuff is here. They've got everything pretty much covered, because when you go this way and then you go this way and then you go this way, that means you've got everything down here covered, everything down there covered, and everything down here covered. And if you're looking at close enough, the line across here will come straight down and intersect with this line coming down this way and this line coming down this way. So plus you get the radar out of the backside of this curve too. So remember, if it's concaved, it's always concaved towards the target, okay? So that you can get a precise target, and we're starting to get that here. But it's always concave towards the target, but you have to always remember the convex side of the search pattern, they're also getting data off of at the same time. So don't think that just because that they're doing this concave towards the target here in Ukraine, that they are only looking at Ukraine. That aircraft is looking at everything out of both sides at the same time. Yep. So, all right. So yeah, Jessica is confirming that still. That yep, she has that hex still, and it has still remained inactive. And this is a new hex. And we've never seen. Is that correct, Jessica? When did we first see this hex? This is a brand new hex on this bird. It had no previous history as a forte, as far as I can find. Can you confirm that? So we'll wait for that. I believe that is the case. I couldn't find anything, but she digs deeper in this than I do on this bird. About a month ago. Yeah, so then this is the replacement, because that's how long this bird's been flying. So, yeah, so the only history on this bird, this is a brand new bird. That's why we're seeing this new search history, and it came alive after the last Forte 10 disappeared over the Black Sea. And it was interesting when the last Forte 10 disappeared, and you can go back and watch that news broadcast, when we were live when it happened, and a P-8 and some other aircraft flew into the area where it disappeared. So, and I've got a theory as to why the Russians are putting up the inflatable S-300s. That's so that they can say that where the HIMARS hit, it wasn't S-300s. They had the inflatable ones there. But the truth of the matter is they had regular ones there, and, well, they blew up. So with that, back to the history of the war in Ukraine.
On August the 24th, 2014, 8 battalion tactical groups of the armed forces of the Russian Federation crossed the state border and launched an offensive in the direction of Luhansk and Donetsk. Unlike the fresh and well-equipped Russian troops, both the armed forces of Ukraine and Ukrainian volunteer units were exhausted by intense summer battles. By introducing over 4,000 soldiers into the battle, the Kremlin drastically changed the balance of forces in the ATO zone, ensuring numerical superiority. The situation escalated rapidly. On that same day, the headquarters of the militants announced the alleged seizure of 7 warehouses with large amounts of ammunition and food. Prior to that, a humanitarian convoy from Putin arrived at the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. It brought the ammunition intended to supply Russian troops. No army is going to last without timely delivery of ammunition. Kremlin strategists were not going to stop at occupying the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. They planned to advance further westwards, and the further that the Russian troops would move from the border, the more difficult the logistics would become, and the railway would get more and more important. One of the largest railway junctions in Donbass is located in Ilovaisk. Control over that station would have allowed the Russian Federation to supply the militants and its army using rail transport. In modern warfare, information is also a weapon. Thus, due to the information pressure and provocative messages in the media on the night of August the 25th, part of the forces of the 51st Brigade retreated from Berezove. The result of that was the breakthrough by militants from the side of Donetsk. By the afternoon, Starobesheve and Kutinovki were blocked by Russian troops. 2 batteries of the 55th Artillery Brigade were eliminated near Starobesheve. At about 4 p.m, Ukrainian artillery managed to strike at the Russian troops near the village of Agronomishne. Units of the Russian armed forces advanced westwards towards Ilovaisk and to the southwest towards Telmanove. By mid-afternoon, they had already taken up positions near Vasilivka, Sontseve, Kranidne, Unable to counter the enemy's superior forces, the 9th Territorial Defence Battalion, which had been covering the southern direction, retreated towards Mariupol. Fighting continued in Ilovaisk. The commander of the Kherson Battalion, Ruslan Storchus, and his driver, Oleg Peshkov, were ambushed and killed. On the same day, near the Chervona-Talivka border crossing in Luhansk region, a group of border guards stopped a Russian reconnaissance group. The fighting lasted more than 2 hours. The Russian side used armoured vehicles, mortars and even helicopters to support the reconnaissance group. 4 Ukrainian border guards were killed in battle, but the attack was propelled. There were also clashes with the forces of the Russian Federation in the area of Novoazovsk. Ukrainian troops managed to destroy up to 10 enemy armoured personnel carriers and 2 tanks. 2 Russian soldiers of the 98th Airborne Brigade were taken prisoner. In Ilovaisk itself, Ukrainian security forces managed to clear out the southern part of the city, as well as repel several attacks on the railway depot located in the centre. On August the 26th at noon, several Russian armoured vehicles attacked the positions of Ukrainian soldiers near Agronomichne. The result of the battle that ensued was that soldiers from the 91st Engineering Regiment and the 51st Brigade disabled a BMD and captured a Russian T-72B3 tank. At about 3 in the afternoon, a convoy of the Russian 8th Separate Rifle Brigade was shelled near Novopilia. 3 vehicles were destroyed. 2 Russian soldiers died on the spot, and the driver of one of the vehicles, Alexander Desyatov, was wounded and captured. In addition, 2 more paratroopers of the 31st Separate Airborne Assault Brigade of the Armed Forces of Russia were captured, Ruslan Akhmetov and Arseny Ilmitov. The Russian offensive was expanding in Luhansk region. In the area of Sukhodolsk, local residents discovered a cluster of Russian troops. After verifying the information, the interventionists were hit with an airstrike. An ammo depot and several vehicles were destroyed. On August 27th, soldiers retreating from Savomohila discovered a similar concentration of Russian troops near Amvrosivka. After contacting the command by mobile phone, they reported the situation. At 10:30, a group of Tochka missiles were fired at the target, the enemy camp was hit, and ammo detonation continued until 7 p.m. On the same day, the Committee of Soldiers' Mothers
straightforward. This is now a cruel world. It's of intention. He shall be charged for what? For being straightforward? For allowing all to understand the meaning of America, land of the free? Is this a medieval time, a time when being wrongly condemned is to be expected? My fellow Americans, we must not allow our nation to crawl into a hole. We must not allow evil to overtake us all. Let us show who's boss. My friends of all color, race, spirituality, of all religions, let's use our power, the power we came to earth for good, for love, for peace, for truth. It's the God-given power, the power of the Almighty. And let us all pray that Donald Trump rises from this evil act upon him and makes a comeback stronger than ever. They may try to knock down and tear down this man, but one thing is for sure, President Donald Trump will show the American people the truth. My fellow Americans, barbaric actions against Trump will only prove that the evil ones are afraid of the truth being exposed, and the greed and deceit will only show that the Democrat fools are guilty of lies, tricks, and corrupt abuse toward the only president who has the best interest of the American people in this country, the United States of America. He who resides with evil will be brought to his knees for redemption, and God shall show all the truth, that President Trump was the only man that was beaten down by lies, and now, my friends, he will prove to all that liberty will show itself once again with the hands, the knowledge, the love, the sweat and tears of each and every man and woman who is proud to be an American. We will prevail. We will not fail. For now, let us come together and allow the truth to finally open up the gates for this nation's glory. Our hope, our future, our children, our love for one another, and our greatest choices, our free will, our home, the land of the free. God bless America, and let's bring President Trump back to help once.
In the Stavropol territory of the Russian Federation, announced that about 400 Russian soldiers had died in battles in eastern Ukraine. Over the course of the day, Russian forces, in cooperation with militants, occupied several border villages east of Novoazovsk. In the evening of August 27th, a division of the 92nd Brigade and a group of the 42nd Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine were sent to Ilovaisk with the aim of liberating it, but came under artillery fire. Both units suffered heavy losses in people and hardware, so the task could not be completed. Having gotten a foothold near the settlements of Novi Svit and Starobesheve, Russian troops cut the supply lines, thereby finalizing the
bold flavor that fits your low-carb lifestyle.
The bounty on your head. How in the world could you think that we're safer now than we were under President Trump when he was willing to put missiles into Syrian air bases with Russia? Okay, so, Ambassador, under Biden, we have China threatening us. We have Russia threatening us. You have a $300,000 bounty on your head. How in the world could you think that we're safer now than we were under President Trump when he was willing to put missiles into Syrian air bases with Russians on the base? What's going on here, sir?
He didn't understand, because he didn't understand fundamentally much of anything about international affairs. His decisions were not based on a coherent philosophy or a coherent policy.
But we were safer.
They were erratic.
He kept world
under
leaders,
Donald Trump.
He kept world leaders.
He
on
signed
their,
a deal
on their
with
heels,
the Taliban.
Sir. He kept them on their back feet. They didn't know where he was coming from, and that made us safer. I mean, can you? He had President
and
Xi
he cut a deal with the Taliban to withdraw from Afghanistan. Did that make us safer, Eric?
When he bombed, no,
withdrawing from Afghanistan make us safer? Right.
You know what made us less safe is when Biden pulled us out of Afghanistan. 13 Americans died, and now
that was Trump's deal.
And now the Taliban tells us, back off, don't kill Al Qaeda.
That's right.
Are you out of your mind, sir?
Same thing they would have done under Donald Trump. No.
Oh,
who cut the deal, Eric? Who cut the deal?
Who delivered the deal?
Donald
Biden
Trump cut
delivered
the deal,
No, Trump wanted
what would Trump have done?
He
what
wanted
would
to leave
Trump have done
people
had he been reelected?
Remember? Sir, let's be
No,
honest
he did not.
People.
He absolutely did not. He did. Eric, you don't know what you're talking about. He wanted everybody out. He cut a deal to do exactly that.
Who disagrees with you, we don't know what we're talking about. Trump said leave 2,500 there until we have a smooth transition of power.
He did not. Look, he said that after he cut the deal. The deal cut us down to zero. That's what Trump wanted. He wanted everybody out. The record on that is completely clear.
Over time, Biden pulled them out. Well, with Americans still there.
No, read the deal, Eric. Have you ever read the deal?
Oh, stop it.
Yeah,
stop
I know you got to go before you're embarrassed even further.
I'm embarrassed. I think you're embarrassed for not knowing what Trump was going to do and hiding behind some false narrative that Trump wasn't prepared for foreign policy when we were safer for 4 years, sir.
I think the facts
now we have
completely clear.
Now we have countries threatening us.
Completely clear.
Encirclement of the Ukrainian troops in Ilovaisk. On August 28th, battles were fought near Krashchurtove, Novosvitlivka and Luhansk airport. Russian troops occupied Novoazovsk, and the road to Mariupol was now open. The Ukrainian command poured all available heavy artillery to the area south of Volnovakha. From those positions, Smerch heavy multiple rocket launch systems and Tochka missile complexes could work in the direction of both Ilovaisk and Mariupol. The remnants of the Ukrainian army fought bravely, and the invasion of Ukraine was not easy for the forces of the Russian Federation. Putin tried to put on the mask of a peacemaker once again. At 1:10 a.m. on August 29, 2014, he addressed the militants without saying a word about the presence of Russian troops in Ukraine, with a request to provide a corridor for Ukrainian troops to leave Ilovaisk. The following day, August 29th, would become the longest day in the modern history of Ukraine. On the night of August 29, 2014, an official statement appeared on the website of the President of Russia. In that document, Putin proposed to the militants that they provide Ukrainian troops with a humanitarian corridor to leave Ilovaisk. After breaking through the state border of Ukraine on August 24th, Russian units blocked the Ukrainian forces in the city of Ilovaisk over the next few days. At the same time, the offensive in the direction of Mariupol and Luhansk was underway. Due to the lack of reserves, the attempts to liberate the Ilovaisk group failed. Despite the lack of experience, working vehicles and personnel, under constant information pressure, Ukrainian troops continued fighting desperately. The stubborn resistance shown by Ukrainians led to significant losses in the Russian divisions. Getting involved in prolonged battles in Ukraine was not worth it for the Russian Federation. In the situation that came about, the parties resorted to negotiations, which resulted in an agreement on the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the city. A plan and itineraries were agreed upon. However, on August 28th at 11 p.m, the General Staff of Russia changed the agreement unilaterally. Under the new conditions, vehicles and arms were to be left behind. The option of withdrawing without weapons was rejected, the plan was adjusted, and the encirclement breakthrough was rescheduled for 3 a.m. of August 29th. However, a different agreement was reached between Ukrainian and Russian commanders on the spot. At about 4 in the morning, a motorcade left Ilovaisk and proceeded towards Mnohopilia. Two convoys were formed, the northern one with the route through Agronomichne, Mikhailivka and Horbatenko, and the southern one through Krasnosilske, Pobieda, Novokatarinivka. At 6 a.m, an armoured personnel carrier with a representative of the Russian army arrived in Mnohopilia to coordinate the withdrawal from the encirclement. The plan was changed once again. The Russian officer said that, according to the new conditions, they were to lay down their arms and advance along the route he indicated on foot. Without explaining the motives for changing the decision, it turned out later the negotiator was delaying time, allowing Russian troops to better equip their positions. The negotiations did not bring any result, and Agronomichne, where the northern convoy was regrouping in, was subjected to mortar fire. Sector B Commander General Ruslan Homchak decided to start the breakthrough, and at 8:15 the convoys set out along the pre-planned routes. Since both convoys stretched out several kilometers, the head vehicles passed through the forward Russian positions without a fight. However, having let some vehicles through, the Russian troops opened fire after receiving the corresponding order. They had set up an ambush and were methodically shooting at the Ukrainian convoy from multiple positions. Radio communication was partially jammed by means of electronic warfare, and radio frequencies were filled with chatter. There was no way of having centralized control over the troops. The soldiers, cut off in Krasnosilske, took up the fight and kept fighting until darkness. Entrenched in the village, roughly 300 Ukrainian law enforcers from various divisions broke through the enemy's resistance, disabled several vehicles, and took several Russian soldiers prisoner. Supporting the breakthrough, Ukrainian artillerists delivered 12 group and single hits using Tochka-U rockets and 15 strikes with Smerch heavy multiple rocket launch systems. Several Su-25 attack jets were also involved. The aircraft struck the positions of Russian troops and helped with adjustment of artillery fire. One of the jets was shot down from the ground. On August the 30th, the group of servicemen in Krasnosilske ceased resistance. It was possible to evacuate some of the soldiers via a Red Cross motorcade in exchange for Russian prisoners, but despite the agreement, Russian officers handed over 108 volunteers of the Donbass Battalion to militants of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. Alone and in groups, soldiers and volunteers spent several more days getting out of the encirclement. The Ukrainian Ilovaisk group was defeated. 368 Ukrainian soldiers were killed. According to information obtained from public sources, the Russian side had lost at least 23 people and 15 vehicles. But according to intelligence and evidence provided by Russian activists, over 200 Russian soldiers died in the Battle of Ilovaisk. On the night of August 30th, the 8th separate medical company moved to the Stalemate area. A local ceasefire agreement was reached to collect and evacuate the bodies of those who had died when leaving Ilovaisk. In addition to the evacuation of bodies, the 8th medical company also retrieved a large number of wounded Ukrainian soldiers. All available means was used to counter the offensive by Russian troops. Helicopters were used to deploy a combined tactical group of the 95th Brigade on the Stalemate highway. Units of the 1st National Guard Brigade that were unable to hold Komsomolsk retreated to Granitne. Units of the 17th Tank Brigade and 19th Territorial Defence Battalion consolidated their positions along the river Kalmus. On August the 30th, the use of T-90A tanks belonging to the 136th Russian Motorized Rifle Brigade was spotted in Luhansk region. Heavy 2S4 Julpan 240mm self-propelled mortars were used by Russian troops in the assault on Luhansk airport.
But that's all we do here is the truth. Hardcore fact porn. The naked truth. We expose all. Adults only. Adult content. Nothing more than the naked truth. Hardcore fact porn than any other hardcore fact porn out there. We'll show you things that others don't dare. The truth. The naked truth. We'll show you the front side, the back side, the underside. We've got it all. We bear all. We've got the dirty secrets. We see what's going on undercover. That's right. Oh no, it's better than a brown paper bag. It's encrypted. We were banned in Russia for factual content. The only news network. You will go to prison. The gulag in Russia if you have our network on your phone. Mother Russia doesn't like it, and you're addicted to hardcore true porn. Real time. Pictures you would share, you wouldn't care to share, or dare to share. You've never seen it like this before, folks. We lay it out for you. Just the naked truth there for God and everybody else to see. We expose everything. That's right, Josh. We've got those live action true cams. We'll show you all the nooks and crannies, the cracks in the story, dedicated to nothing more than hardcore truth. So if you're addicted to the hardcore news porn, fact porn, we've got it. We can fix your addiction right here. All you gotta do is jerk out that cell phone. Just whip it out. Go to the link at the top of the chat. Sign up to VIP above. And we will get you a non-stop stream of hardcore truth porn. And put your clothes back on.
Ukrainian artillery and missile units located in the area south of Volnovakha were actively firing at the advancing enemy, not sparing any of their expensive missiles or shells. In some ways, that helped delay the attack of Russian armoured groups. On August the 31st, Russian troops launched a massive assault on Luhansk airport. They used tanks and all kinds of artillery, including heavy weapons. There was also an attempt to carry out an assault on Donetsk airport. On the same day, the attack was repulsed and Russian-backed terrorists suffered losses from Ukrainian artillery fire. It is worth noting that artillery fire made an enormous contribution to the fight against Russian troops. Many frontiers were held only due to artillery support. On August 31st, a battalion tactical group of the armed forces of Russia was spotted near the town of Dokuchaevsk. The identified target was hit by a group missile strike, which resulted in a unit losing its combat readiness. On the same day, in the Sea of Azov, 3 miles from the coast near the village of Bezymene, Ukrainian border boats were attacked by guided missile fire. After being hit by several missiles, the reef boat sank and 2 crew members died together with the ship. On the night of September 1st, 2014, Luhansk airport had to be abandoned. After the final assault on the airport in the city of Luhansk, the defense of which had lasted 146 days, it physically ceased to exist. On September 1st, Russian troops attacked Lutuhina and Malo-Mykolaievka. The village of Veselahora and the dominant height next to it were captured. In the south, Russian-backed forces continued their advance towards Mariupol. By the evening, Ukrainian border guards had a firefight with an advanced enemy unit near Sakantka. On the night of September 1st, a group of troops and vehicles of the Russian army near Novoazovsk was hit by a missile strike. That same night, a column of tanks that had been heading in the direction of Komsomolsk was hit by an artillery strike. On September 2nd, Ukrainian troops retreated from Lutuhine and Heroivka, occupying a new line of defense along the river Siversky Donetsk. On September 3rd, a telephone conversation took place between the presidents of Ukraine and the Russian Federation, in which they negotiated ceasefire terms. At the same time, the forces of the 79th and 95th Brigades had been carrying out raids in the area between Volnovakha and Mariupol. The paratroopers were, first and foremost, performing a demonstrative role, creating the appearance of a large group of troops. This was facilitated by formidable artillery support, which dealt great damage to the enemy. The success of the operation allowed them to repulse the offensive on Mariupol and put some aces up the sleeves of Ukrainian negotiators at talks in Minsk. The Minsk agreements were signed on September the 5th. In early September 2014, the existence of the state of Ukraine, and without exaggeration, the fate of millions of people was at stake. The country's armed forces and volunteer units had literally laid their bones in the path of Russian invaders. Bending under pressure exerted by the Russian Federation, Ukraine held out.
I swear, some of these people that come in here are so freaking stupid. It just blows my mind. Okay, so let's go to the idiot here. Oh, well, it's powering the circulation pumps, but not powering any of the monitoring equipment. It's powering the circulation pumps, but it's not turning on any of the lights. It's powering the circulation pumps, but it's not transmitting any data. You idiot. It's powering the circulation pumps, but it doesn't turn on the monitoring cameras. Well, no, I don't know if they run in packs. I just think stupid people hang out with stupid people. Now we know why you're a sofa king and you're not a news broadcaster, because you're not smart enough. God, King. Come on, King. Let's hear it, buddy. Come on, King. Come on, buddy. You can do it, King. Come on. Dumbass. Come on, sofa. Couch potato. Come on, King. You can do it. Come on, King. Come on. Come on. absolutely insane, folks. Absolutely insane. Blows my friggin' mind. That's bullshit. Sphincter? Mr. Sphincter? Don't be a stupid anus. Show us, anus. You're such a genius. Enlighten us. Come on, anus. Show us. Enlighten us. Please, anus. Here, anus. Come on, anus. You can say something. Please. Put something in there, anus. Educate us, anus. You're so smart. You're that smart ass. You're that smart ignoramus. Come on. You can do it. Come on, anus. Come on. Show us, anus. Show us your anus. Okay, anus. Come on. Come on. You can do it. Shit or get off the pot, anus. They got generators they're running. Everything is just fine. Wow, more stupid people. They come in all at once.
As of April 14, 2014, the militants of the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk republics seized administrative buildings in all major cities of the Donbass region. Unlike during the annexation of Crimea, the Russian army did not directly participate in these events in the Donbass. Possessing significant supplies of small arms imported from the Russian Federation, the special services of Russia tried to form a local army. They appropriately named it the People's Militia of the Donbass. This is the fourth series of the film about the ATO, History of the War. We're trying to get to the bottom of the anti-terrorist operation in the east of Ukraine, its reasons and results. What does the Russian Federation have to do with all this? How does the confrontation between Ukraine and Russia pose...
Yeah, guys, I'm going to shut this down and I'm going to restart it on KLW because there's only 38 people here. So, it ain't worth tying up the resources for 38 people, so I'm going to restart it over there. We still got mods. We can still kick out anybody who's out of line. So I'm going to see you, or excuse me, in Inventor Lee Wheelbarger is where we're going to do it. So I'll see you guys over there.